Hello everybody, welcome to Little Rusty Buckets. We are back with Discord hot takes. We're actually going to be getting this video out before the regular hot takes because unfortunately on the last hot takes video, I mentioned that it was my birthday and I should have saved that shit for the next episode because it just meant that every damn comment was about my birthday and giving me birthday wishes, which I much appreciated, but good God, completely useless comment section. So we're getting this one out before. I also went ahead and sorted through these instead of going through it live because with there being more and more people in the Discord, I want to make sure I'm highlighting everyone as evenly as possible. I also want to add, if you are in this Discord, and I'll also send a message about this, but for the hot takes tab from now on, if you guys could limit yourself to 2 or 3 per week, just for yourselves individually, if everybody wants to post 10 of them and there's 50 people in there, it's going to be a bitch to sort through it and make sure that everybody gets the spotlight that they are paying for. So, yes, with that said, let's get into these takes. Embiid's career will go down as a bigger what if than Rose's career. Embiid, when he played, has been one of the greatest big men of all time offensively and one of the best offensive players of all time, period. But his body is so fragile it cannot handle a prolonged regular season plus postseason due to breaking down super fast. It has now gotten to the point where he may be out of the league next year via medical retirement while still being capable of dropping 40 with ease just due to how fragile he is. Rose, on the other hand, peaked at one of the top 5 to 10 players in the league, was never actually the best one, but was just sapped of his peak and the best version of himself by injuries. Well, I think that is the reason why Derrick Rose is still the bigger what if, is because his peak was not actually available to us. You could argue maybe there is a what if of Joel Embiid being healthy in a postseason that's just as dramatic as all that. But I think the fact that Joel Embiid got to be a superstar player for like 5 years, that trumps Derrick Rose getting to do it for 1.5. So I think just literally Derrick Rose ends up being a bigger what if because of the fact that he just had less time in the spotlight. But Joel Embiid could arguably be a bigger what if just because his ceiling was much higher. Even if Derrick Rose played out the next decade of his career, healthy, I don't think he would have retired as a top 25 player of all time. But if Joel Embiid was healthy throughout his entire career, I would be shocked if he wasn't at least a top 25 player of all time by the end of that. So just for the fact that I think Embiid had a much higher ceiling than Derrick Rose did, the fact that Embiid proved to have a much higher ceiling, bro averaged 36 points per game. I would still give the edge to Derrick Rose, though, just because the lack of time. That take was from D'Lo's Strongest Soldier. Pretty good one, but I disagree. Al Jefferson's postgame says, not sure how hot this take is, but the media coverage of international superstars is really gross before winning a championship. From Ryan Hollins, Kendrick Perkins, Gilbert Arenas, and others throwing shade every chance they could get with Giannis, with takes like Giannis is the most overrated player in the world, to he doesn't even know how to be a superstar from Gilbert Arenas, to Nick Wright having the nerve to suggest Chris Paul should have been MVP in Jokic's first MVP season. Oh, God, that pissed me off so much. To my all-time favorite, if the league wants more defense, just kick the Europeans out of the league take from Gil, despite Rudy, Wemby, and Giannis being in the league. I follow other sports from England, Australia, and international sports like football and fighting where the demographic is less black. And if pundits said the same thing about these former players and media... Wait, what? Where the demographic is less black, and if pundits said the same thing those former players and media people say about the athletes not from the same country as the league here, then they'd lose their job. And it's a shame it took Giannis getting 50 in the finals to escape the Robin narrative and Jokic being the best player in the world for 5 years to stop the shade. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And, there's always a degree of prove it, like, you gotta prove it to me mentality that a lot of people have about players, but it's very clearly heightened. And like the fact that Giannis was in the middle of one of the greatest runs of all time and they still had the gall to be like, are we sure he's better than Chris Middleton? Very indicative of that exact thing. And to me, the way that it is just so clearly such a night and day distinction between how they treat people, it's crazy to me, frankly, that it's not called out more often than it is. From Mosshead, I don't believe the Cavs will make the Eastern Conference Finals. Most of their players are shooting career highs from all parts of the floor, and usually that doesn't translate for an entire run. And most teams will try to test Mobley's three and size up against Garland and Spida and hunt Garland on defense constantly, with their biggest weakness being in the half court. That's usually a receipt for disaster, especially with most of their offense being assisted and them needing more shot creation will prove to be their eventual downfall. So many things wrong with this take, respectfully. So first of all, yes, they're going to test Mobley's three. That's for sure. I'm sure they'll put size on Garland and Mitchell, but that's nothing that they have not dealt with before. Nothing that they haven't dealt with this entire year. Everyone's shooting a career high from all parts of the floor. Maybe that's because they have an offensive system that generates perfectly clean looks constantly. On top of that, Darius Garland is having his best season. Evan Mobley is having his best season. Ty Jerome is having his best season. DeAndre Hunter is having his best season, even though he's a new addition. There's a lot of guys who are peaking right now, but I don't read that as just everybody on this team is on a hot streak. It's everybody on this team is better at basketball than they were before. When we're talking about a 60 fucking game sample size, you can't just go, well, they're shooting too hot. That's ridiculous. On top, their very assist-heavy offense is their strength, not a fucking weakness. And they have the shot creation to lean on when they need it. That's the whole point of Donovan Mitchell, is if you are lagging a little bit, Donovan Mitchell will just be a 30-point per game scorer when you need him to be. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that they won't do well against Boston. Saying they won't make the Eastern Conference Finals is ridiculous, because they're not going to match up with the Celtics until the conference finals. And there is nobody in the East that is going to beat a healthy Cavs team. All right, there is not. There is nobody in the East that's going to beat a Boston team other than the Cavs. Those two teams, if it's not one of them coming out of the East, it will be because there were severe injuries, game series-changing injuries. I just could not disagree with you more. They're great. Their three-point shooting is good because they have a core of excellent three-point shooters. It's not even guys who it's that surprising that they're shooting well. It's really not. The only one really has been Evan Mobley. From F, not sure how to phrase this exactly. Certain players in the NBA are incredibly talented but aren't feasibly championship-level players. Some of these guys include Cat, Prime Beal, Zach LaVine, players who are really gifted offensively but either command too much of the offensive flow / team's cap space or are complete liabilities defensively. Karl Anthony Towns, for instance, probably can't be the starting center of a championship team. He's simply too weak as a defensive player in a crucial defensive possession. At the 4, it might be more feasible, but you'd have to put him next to a guy like Gobert. To build a championship team with Cat would require you to jump through too many hoops. Personally, I'd rather have a few quality role players if the goal is to win a championship. If the goal is to be a pretty great team but never win, fine. Cat's your guy. Well, I think you're not giving enough credence to situation. So the way that a player can become overpaid is by being over-relied on. Cat, when the Timberwolves gave him that contract, probably leaned on him a little bit too much. Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine, when the Wizards and Bulls gave them contracts, absolutely, those teams leaned on those guys way too fucking much. Where if they were in the context where they were never forced to be that first option, or not just the first option, but the only option for those teams, then they would have been in a different situation. They would have been paid less money. Their weaknesses would be exposed significantly less. Karl Anthony Towns is at a bad spot because of the center position. That is the rough one, where if you're not a, undeniable, Jokic level offensive player, if you're a bad defensive center, that really, really hurts a lot. So because of that, Cat is probably the number one example of just this guy who's super talented, but just in this awkward spot because of circumstances outside of his control. But guys like Zach LaVine, guys like Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal was a great second option next to John Wall for a short period of time. And I think if he was a second option on a different team, it could have worked out just fine, but it didn't work out that way, and instead he got a gazillion dollars, so I'm sure he's happy with it. But yeah, when you have the level of talent that a Beal or a Zach do, and they're not just in a devastatingly bad situation position-wise, they can find a place, absolutely. Zach LaVine's been killing it with the Kings lately. You know, Bradley Beal last year with the Phoenix Suns was pretty good in his more limited role. Nowhere near good enough to justify everything else that was wrong with that roster because of the amount of money he was making. But just in terms of how he can adapt to a smaller role, that was indicative of it being very well possible. And, you know, it's everything is circumstantial. A lot of the reason these guys even have the reputations they do, as the guys that you just said, is because of the situations they were drafted into, or in the case of Zach LaVine, traded into. A peak Joel Embiid, excluding health, was just as, if not more dominant than peak Shaquille O'Neal in my opinion. 33-plus points per game, 11 to 12 rebounds, 4 and 5 assists, almost 2 blocks, a steal, drawing fouls and actually capitalizing on that, shots fired, spacing the floor to allow for opening for his teammates, and I would say similar gravity to what Shaq had in his prime. I love you, Joel, and I hope I see you on the court again someday. One of my favorite players ever, also just fuck Shaq. So I wonder if there's any bias here. All right, Connor, let's take a look at this. So you're essentially arguing that simply there was a more versatile stat sheet from Joel Embiid. Not only is he at 33 plus, which I don't think Shaq has ever even crossed 30. I feel like he's averaged like 29.8, but has he actually averaged 30? Yeah, he's averaged 29.3, 29.7, but never quite gotten to the 30 point per game mark, whereas Joel was in that 33 percentage point. Let's just compare their MVP seasons just to get a free number sample size here. So MVP Shaq, 29.7 points, 13.6 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 3 blocks. That's more. That's a good bit more than good old Joel Embiid there. And his true shooting percentage, because he shoots just 52% at the line, ends up being 57. No. Yeah, 58. Yeesh. I never considered how bad Shaq's true shooting percentage would be relative to his rim efficiency just because of the free throw shooting. It really is the difference maker, because if we also just contrast field goal attempts, Shaq is taking 21 to get to 28 points per game, 29 points per game. And yeah, Joel Embiid took 20 to get to 33. Also is taking some threes in there. 86% free throw shooter instead of the percentage, the 50s. And then advanced, we get to MVP season. He had a 65.5% true shooting percentage. So there's a couple of things to consider here. First of all is the era. Shaq dealt with double bigs. Like, there were 2 centers on the floor almost all the time when he was on the floor. Joel Embiid did not have to deal with that. Joel Embiid had far superior floor spacing. But obviously, Joel Embiid's a more skilled player than Joel Embiid. Than Shaquille O'Neal. There's no denying that. However, I think Shaq was much better at using his physical imposingness to his advantage, where I think, for the most part, Joel Embiid leaned just a little bit, too much on jumpers and finesse plays and getting to the free throw line, where I would have liked him to just put people's asses in the basket more often than he did. He did it all the time, just to be clear, a couple times a game. But Joel Embiid was like the biggest fucking player in the NBA for quite a while now, and I hate that I'm using the word was because it feels like his career is over. But truly, truly huge, 280 pounds, and he moves crazy well for someone that size. So if you want to argue that Joel Embiid's regular season MVP performance was more impressive than Shaq's MVP season performance, I can get behind that. I can be okay with that perspective because the counting stats are better. The efficiency is way better. He is averaging 1.3 less blocks, 3 less rebounds. So he has that working against him. But Yeah, I fully understand where you're coming from a regular season perspective. However, I am not going to call someone who does not have a single dominant postseason to their name more dominant than Shaquille O'Neal, who averaged fucking 30 billion points in the fucking finals. Here, let's do some stat musing real quick. Shaquille O'Neal. Okay, in 20 total finals games played for the Los Angeles Lakers, Shaq averages 33.6 points, 14.1 rebounds, 3 assists, 2.5 blocks. He shoots 60% from the field. His true shooting percentage bumps up to 60 overall. Of his 14 rebounds, 5 of them are offensive rebounds. He has a plus minus of plus 62 overall divided between those 20 games. Yeah, bro. The postseason is where you prove it, and Shaq proved the fuck out of it, and Joel Embiid has not, which sucks. It's not. I don't really think it's his fault that that's the case, but it is the case. So he's absolutely not taking that title from Shaq. Dwight Howard is higher all time than Allen Iverson. AI was obviously more of a cultural icon, but I don't think it's close when you account for Dwight's DPOYs. I think just simply from a playstyle perspective, this ends up ringing true because Dwight could still score 20 points per game. He could grab you 15 rebounds per game, and then he was the best defender in the entire league. Like, I think the defense combined with the fact that you're still getting plenty of good offense just ultimately makes him a better peak player. Allen Iverson had a longer period of time being truly superstar level, so I think he still ends up amounting to being higher all time, but peak wise, if you want to argue Dwight's better, I'm cool with that. Obviously, Dwight has a shitload of DPOYs. I think my take would be Dwight Howard was better at his peak, but not higher all time, because those are not necessarily the same thing. But it's within reason. Another take we get from Jay. Once again, we're talking about Shaq. Shaq wouldn't dominate in today's game, like people say, at least on defense. I know it's a common thing in NBA discourse to say he'd be a monster in today's league, but I disagree. Yeah, obviously he'd be a top player. He's an all-time great, but today's game emphasizes speed and spacing way more than it did in his day, something that's going to hurt him. I think he's going to struggle getting up and down the court a lot, causing defensive lapses in transition. He's going to get swapped onto more skilled guards and wings on the perimeter. As he would say, that's barbecue chicken, and hunted more than ever. Well, first things first, yes, he would be targeted more than ever just because mismatch hunting is a more prevalent part of the game now. It just is. I think your image of Shaq is fatter than my image of Shaq. I feel like you're thinking late Lakers and then Miami Heat and beyond era of Shaq. I implore you to watch Orlando Magic Shaq highlights, especially his first 2-3 years in the season. I think the weight gain that Shaq experienced would not have happened in the NBA with more modern training programs and things of that nature. And he would also get publicly fat shamed way more than he did in his era. But if Shaq was in young Shaq shape in today's league, oh my God. Because the narrative that Shaq needed the weight to be a dominant force is stupid. It has always been stupid. It has always been an excuse for Shaq being fat. Which is fine. He still ended up being dominant through that. However, he averaged 29.3 points per game for back-to-back seasons for the Orlando Magic, winning a scoring title. 29 points, 12.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 2.6 blocks. He averaged fucking 3.5 blocks out of his rookie year. Dude, Shaq was dominant as fuck scoring the ball. His efficiency is the exact goddamn same. And then he's just a way, way, way better defender. So my common take, I think Orlando Magic Shaq is not way better, but he's better than Lakers Shaq. And that version of Shaq in today's game, wholly terrifying. But, you know, even if it's the slow-footed version of Shaq, he's such an undeniable force around the rim that even if he does have his defensive lapses, we're going to be doing the same thing we do with Nikola Jokic, where it's like, yeah, I get it. His defense is not ideal, but come on, look at him. That would be it. That would be simply the end of it. It maybe would limit his level of impact by contrast to what he used to do in the 2000s, but Shaq would very much be a top 5 player in the NBA today, and I think if it's peak Shaq and he's led in the right direction and he stays in good shape, he would be the best player in the NBA. It is my long-held belief that Shaquille O'Neal at his absolute peak is probably the best any basketball player has ever been, and he should be the greatest player of all time. But, of course, there was the aforementioned getting fat part that kind of got in the way. So, yeah, Shaq would still dominate the modern NBA. Maybe not to the extent he did otherwise, especially because defensive schemes have just gotten more complex and capable of dealing with the type of stuff that Shaq does. Also, I didn't even mention the spacing factor. It would help a whole lot. Not that he historically dealt with poorly spaced teams. In fact, he actually usually had better spacing than not for his era. But, yeah, just having 4 out, 1 in, and your 1 in is Shaq. Oh, it's too good. Just way too good. That's just undeniable. All right, that was Discord Hot Takes. Thank you guys so much for submitting, and thank you guys so much for the people who have been joining in lately. We have not had a big influx in patrons in a while, but ever since we brought this series, we have, which was the hope. But I'm just so happy to have you guys here. Happy we are getting some more money to lean on with our business. We've had a good month, man. Things have been going well. I'm feeling good. Hope things are going well for you. If they're not, that's rough, man. Buddy. It's rough, buddy. That's what the fucking meme is. That's rough, buddy. I'm sorry, Avatar fans.